Close your eyes. Let your breathing find its own pace. Let the thoughts of the day dissolve, one by one, like ice in warm water. Let the darkness deepen around you until it becomes something comfortable, something you could rest inside of. Tonight, we are going to imagine a miss. Not a near miss in the human sense, not an asteroid that passes close enough to see, close enough to feel the gravitational tug, close enough to produce a news cycle and a temporary awareness of our fragility. We are going to imagine a miss in the deep, silent, astronomical sense. A rock 10 kilometers wide, traveling at 20 kilometers per second, hurtling through the inner solar system on a trajectory that, in our world, brought it to the shallow shelf of the Gulf of Mexico 66.038 million years ago, with a force equivalent to 1 billion nuclear weapons, and ended the reign of the dinosaurs. We are going to imagine that rock arriving at a slightly different angle, traveling a slightly different path, missing the Earth by a margin large enough to be safe and small enough to make you understand how close things can come. We are going to imagine that the most consequential geological event in the history of vertebrate life simply did not happen. No impact, no fireball, no earthquake felt on every continent simultaneously, no tsunami walls kilometers high, no superheated ejecta raining back down from the stratosphere, setting the world's forests on fire, no impact winter, no sulfur cloud, no darkened sky, no collapse of the food web from the bottom up. The dinosaurs live. Not just the small ones, not just the feathered, bird-line theropods that survive in our own world as the 10,000 species of modern birds, all of them. The great sauropods with their cathedral necks, the tyrannosaurids with their massive skulls and their tiny, powerful arms, the hadrosaurs in their vast herds, the ceratopsians with their extraordinary facial ornamentation, the ankylosaurs like tanks of bone and keratin, the pachycephalosaurs with their domed, fighting heads. All of them live. All of them continue. All of them have 66 million more years to evolve into whatever the pressures of a living, changing, uninterrupted world would make of them. 66 million years. That is approximately the same length of time as the entire age of mammals, the entire Cenozoic era, the era that, in our world, followed the extinction of the dinosaurs and produced everything from the first small, rodent-like placental mammals to the emergence of human beings and the civilizations we have built. In 66 million years of mammalian evolution, the world went from a landscape of small, nocturnal insectivores and medium-sized condylarths to a world of whales and elephants and great apes and Homo sapiens writing poetry and launching spacecraft. 66 million years is enough time for extraordinary things. What would 66 million years of continued dinosaur evolution produce? That is what we are going to explore tonight, slowly, patiently, with all the care and detail and dreamlike unhurriedness that deep time deserves. We are going to walk through the world that the dinosaurs would have built if the rock had missed the forests they would have grown in, the seas they would have swum in, the skies they would have filled, the minds they might eventually have developed, the world they might have made. So let the warmth of the room hold you, let the silence deepen, and let us begin with the last perfect day. The last perfect day in our world. There was a last perfect day for the dinosaurs. A day when everything was as it had been when the hadrosaurs grazed in the floodplains of what is now Montana, when the Tyrannosaurus hunted in the forests of Laramidia, when the mosasaurs prowled the shallow inland sea that divided North America into two long strips of land, when the pterosaurs rode the thermals above the western interior seaway in the warm, humid air of a late Cretaceous afternoon. It was not a day of foreboding. Animals do not have foreboding about geological events. The Triceratops grazing at the edge of the forest did not look up at the sky with any particular anxiety. The Edmontosaurus herd wading through the shallow river did not pause their feeding to contemplate the fragility of their world. The last perfect day was, for them, simply another day, warm, humid, productive, dangerous in the ordinary ways, full of the ordinary business of eating and avoiding being eaten, and finding mates and raising young. The Cretaceous world of 66 million years ago was a world at the peak of its richness. The dinosaurs had been diversifying for 135 million years at this point. They had filled every ecological niche that large land animals can fill, and many that we would not have predicted. The late Cretaceous fauna of the western interior of North America, the fauna preserved in exquisite detail in the rocks of Alberta and Montana and South Dakota, is perhaps the best understood dinosaur fauna in the history of paleontology, and it is astonishing in its diversity and its complexity. Tyrannosaurus rex was the apex predator, but it was not alone at the top. Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus and Daspletosaurus and a dozen other tyrannosaurids occupied similar ecological roles in different regions and at different times, each slightly different in body proportions and size and behavior. Below the tyrannosaurs were smaller predators, the dromaeosaurs, like Deinonychus and Velociraptor and Dakotaraptor, fast and feathered and intelligent by the standards of their time, hunting in packs or alone, depending on the prey available. And below them were the troodontids, even smaller and perhaps even more intelligent, with larger brains relative to their body size than almost any other dinosaur group. The herbivores were equally diverse. The hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, were the most abundant large herbivores of the late Cretaceous, present in herds of potentially enormous size, their hollow crests resonating with calls that may have been as complex as the calls of modern elephants. The ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, relatives of Triceratops, were also diverse and abundant, their extraordinary facial ornamentation varying from species to species in ways that suggest sexual selection as powerful as anything in the modern world. The ankylosaurs and the stegosaurs provided the armored contingent, slow and heavily defended. Their armor and weapons, the product of millions of years of coevolution with the tyrannosaurs. The plants of the late Cretaceous were also at a pivotal moment. The flowering plants, the angiosperms, had appeared in the early Cretaceous and had been spreading rapidly, diversifying into an extraordinary range of forms and filling niches that had previously been occupied by ferns and gymnosperms. By the late Cretaceous, flowering plants were dominant in many ecosystems, though the great conifer forests of the higher latitudes were still largely gymnosperm dominated. The world was in the middle of one of the most significant botanical transitions in the history of life, and it was a transition that the dinosaurs were living through, adapting to, driving in part with their own browsing and seed dispersal and habitat modification. This is the world that existed on the last perfect day in our world, the day before the impact. In the world we are imagining tonight, there is no impact day. The asteroid curves past the Earth, drawn slightly off course by some orbital perturbation, and continues into the dark. The last perfect day is followed by another perfect day, and another, and 66 million more years of days. Let us see what happens, what the asteroid actually did Before we can understand what would have been different if the asteroid had missed, we need to understand precisely what it did, what the chain of events was that followed the impact, and why it was so catastrophically effective at ending the world the dinosaurs had built. The asteroid, formerly known as the Chicxulub impactor, after the crater it left beneath the Gulf of Mexico, was a rocky body approximately 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter. It was traveling at roughly 20 kilometers per second when it struck the shallow carbonate shelf of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula at an angle of perhaps 60 degrees from horizontal. The impact released energy estimated at 100 teratons of TNT equivalent, approximately 10 billion times the energy of the largest nuclear weapon ever detonated. The immediate effects were local but devastating. The explosion excavated a crater 180 kilometers in diameter and perhaps 20 kilometers deep. The rock at the impact site was instantly vaporized. The surrounding rock was melted and thrown outward in all directions, some of it reaching orbital velocity and leaving the Earth entirely, some of it raining back down across the entire planet over the following hours as glowing, superheated spherules. These returning spherules, trillions of hot rocks ranging from sand grain size to pebble size, heated the atmosphere as they fell, raising temperatures across the entire planetary surface to levels sufficient to ignite vegetation. Much of the world's forest burned in the hours following the impact, not because of any fire directly connected to the impact site, but because the sky itself was briefly hotter than an oven, radiating heat downward. The tsunamis were immediate and enormous. The impact in shallow water produced waves of extraordinary height that propagated outward in all directions, devastating coastlines thousands of kilometers from the impact site. The earthquakes generated by the impact magnitude estimates range from 10 to 12 on the Richter scale, far larger than any historical earthquake, shook every continent simultaneously, triggering landslides and volcanic eruptions and the collapse of coastal habitats. But the most devastating effects were not immediate. They were the slow consequences of what the impact put into the atmosphere. The vaporized rock from the impact site and the Yucatan platform is made of carbonate and sulfate rocks that are particularly rich in climate-active compounds, released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere. The sulfur dioxide formed sulfuric acid, aerosols that reflected sunlight, producing a rapid and severe cooling, an impact winter. The soot from the burning forests darkened the sky further. For months, perhaps years, the sky was dark enough that photosynthesis was severely impaired across most of the planet. No sunlight meant no photosynthesis. No photosynthesis meant the collapse of the food web from the bottom up. Plants died. Phytoplankton in the ocean died. The herbivores that depended on the plants died. The carnivores that depended on the herbivores died. The end Cretaceous mass extinction, which killed approximately 75% of all species on Earth, was not primarily a story of incineration or tsunami or earthquake. It was primarily a story of darkness and cold and starvation, of a food web collapse that took months to fully develop and years to reach its worst extent, and that killed by degrees rather than by the immediate violence of the impact itself. The non-avian dinosaurs, all of them that are not direct ancestors of modern birds, died in this collapse. They were not, as a group, uniquely vulnerable. They were simply large animals that required large amounts of food in a world where food had suddenly and catastrophically become scarce. Large animals are always the first to go in a food web collapse because their caloric requirements are so much higher than those of small animals. The small dinosaurs that survived the birdline theropods survived because they were small enough to subsist on seeds and insects and the other resources that remained available even in the darkened world. This is what the asteroid did. And in the world we are imagining tonight, it did not happen. The sky remained clear. The sun continued to shine. The phytoplankton continued to photosynthesize. The plants continued to grow. The hadrosaurs continued to feed. The tyrannosaurs continued to hunt. And the world continued. The world at the moment of impact. To understand where the dinosaurs would have gone from here, we need to understand precisely where they were, what the world looked like at the moment that, in our timeline, became the end of their era, and in the alternate timeline we are imagining, became simply another moment in an ongoing story. The world of 66 million years ago was warmer than today, significantly warmer. The average global temperature was perhaps 4 to 8 degrees Celsius above modern levels. There were no polar ice caps, even the poles were mild enough for forests, and fossil wood and dinosaur bones have been found in rocks of Cretaceous age from within the Arctic Circle, evidence that dinosaurs lived year-round in polar regions. The sea level was higher than today, higher even than it would be if all modern ice melted, because the warmer mantle and the faster spreading of the mid-ocean ridges displaced more water from the ocean basins onto the face. Continental shelves. The continents were in different positions. The Atlantic Ocean existed but was significantly narrower than today. North America and Europe were further apart, but not as far apart as they are now. The South Atlantic, between South America and Africa, was a relatively young and narrow ocean, not the wide body of water it would become. India was in the middle of its northward journey toward Asia, still far from the collision that would raise the Himalayas. Australia was still attached to Antarctica, though the connection was weakening. The world map would be recognizable in its broad outlines. The shapes of the continents would be familiar, though their positions would be wrong. The vegetation of the late Cretaceous was a patchwork of ancient and modern. The angiosperms, the flowering plants, had diversified explosively in the preceding 30 million years, and now dominated the low-latitude and mid-latitude ecosystems. The tropical and subtropical regions were covered in forests of flowering trees, many of them not closely related to any modern forest tree, but recognizable as flowering plants nonetheless. The river margins and the coastal lowlands were thick with the large-leafed, fast-growing flowering plants that thrive in warm, wet, disturbed environments. The drier interiors had their own distinctive flora of drought-adapted flowering plants and conifers. At higher latitudes in the polar regions and the cool temperate zones, the conifers were still dominant. The high-latitude forests of the late Cretaceous were broad-leafed conifer forests made up of relatives of the modern araucarias and podocarpids and a variety of groups now extinct. Their leaves, broad enough to capture the diffuse sunlight of the polar summers. These forests were home to the polar dinosaurs' smaller, more cold-adapted species, possibly with more insulating feathers or thicker body fat than their tropical relatives, capable of surviving the long, dark Arctic winters in ways that we do not yet fully understand. The oceans were warm and diverse. The shallow epicontinental seas, the inland seas that covered large areas of the continental interiors during the high sea levels of the Cretaceous, were teeming with life. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs as the apex predators, giant fish like Xiphactinus as secondary predators, ammonoids in extraordinary variety, belemnites, and the rich communities of invertebrates that supported all of this predation. The deep ocean was also warm and well oxygenated, supporting diverse communities of organisms at every depth. The sky was full of pterosaurs. The late Cretaceous pterosaurs were the giants of the group, the uninterrupted, enormous, soaring animals with wingspans of up to 10 or 11 meters in the largest species, Quetzalcoatlus northropi. These animals, the largest flying creatures in the history of life, if we exclude some hypothetical future forms, soared on thermals above the inland plains, covered enormous distances, and may have hunted much like modern storks, walking on all four limbs across the landscape and seizing prey with their long, toothless beaks. They shared the sky with the early birds, the enantiornithines and the hesperornithines, and the earliest members of the modern bird lineage, which were already diverse and abundant by the late Cretaceous. This is the starting point. This is where the alternate timeline diverges. The rock misses, the sky stays clear, and the world continues from this point, carrying all of its late Cretaceous richness forward into an uninterrupted future. The dinosaurs that would have lived in the immediate aftermath of the miss, in the first thousands and tens of thousands of years after the asteroid passes harmlessly by the world, is, of course, unchanged. The dinosaurs don't know that anything almost happened. Evolution doesn't know. The ecosystems carry on. But over time, over the hundreds of thousands and millions of years that follow, things do change. Not because of the miss itself, but because the world is always changing, because plate tectonics continues, because climate shifts, because ecological relationships evolve, because evolution never stops. The late Cretaceous world of 66 million years ago, carried forward without the impact, does not remain the late Cretaceous world indefinitely. It changes. It becomes something new. And the question is, what? The first thing to understand is that the dinosaurs were not a stable, static group at the time of the impact. They were still evolving. The late Cretaceous was a time of active diversification among the dinosaurs. New species were appearing. Old ones were disappearing through normal ecological turnover. Geographic barriers were shifting as the continents moved and the seaways changed. And new ecological niches were opening as the angiosperms continued to diversify and the floral landscape continued to change. The dinosaurs were not at their peak and beginning to decline despite a persistent myth to the contrary. There is no strong evidence of a general dinosaur decline before the impact. They were, by every measure, a vigorous and diversifying group on the day the asteroid arrived. Carried forward without the impact, this diversification would have continued. The specific species of the late Cretaceous would eventually have been replaced by their evolutionary descendants, just as the dinosaurs of the Triassic were replaced by different dinosaurs in the Jurassic, and the Jurassic dinosaurs by different ones in the Cretaceous. Tyrannosaurus rex, as a species, would eventually have gone extinct. All species eventually go extinct, but the Tyrannosaur lineage would have continued, producing new species adapted to the new conditions of the Paleogene and Neogene worlds. The hadrosaurs and the ceratopsians and the ankylosaurs and all the other groups would have continued their evolutionary trajectories, diverging into new forms, exploring new ecological spaces, responding to the changing world around them. To imagine what those forms might have been, we need to think about what evolutionary pressures would have been acting on the various dinosaur lineages in the 66 million years after the hypothetical miss. The most important pressures would have been the continued evolution and diversification of flowering plants. The angiosperms were still radically transforming the world's vegetation in the late Cretaceous, and this transformation would have continued regardless of the asteroid. The grasses which appeared in the fossil record in the late Cretaceous but did not become globally dominant until the Eocene and Miocene in our world would have spread. The spread of grasslands would have created new ecosystems, new opportunities for grazing animals, new pressures on the animals that exploited them. The continued movement of the continents. In our world, the Paleogene and Neogene saw India collide with Asia, raising the Himalayas, South America separate from North America, producing the Great American Biotic Interchange when the two continents reconnected in the Pliocene, and Australia separate from Antarctica. These geological events would have happened regardless of whether the asteroid hit. They are driven by mantle convection, not by surface events. The changing continental geography would have created new barriers and new connections, driving geographic speciation among the dinosaurs, just as it drove speciation among the mammals in our world. The gradual cooling of the global climate. The world of 66 million years ago was warmer than today, and it has been gradually cooling since then, driven by changes in the distribution of the continents, by the uplift of mountain ranges that promote chemical weathering and draw down CO2, and by other long-term geological processes. In our world, this cooling eventually produced the Pleistocene ice ages. In the dinosaur world, the same cooling trend would have operated, producing different but analogous climate changes. These pressures, botanical change, continental movement, climate cooling, would have shaped the evolution of the surviving dinosaurs in ways we can begin to imagine, even if we can never be certain of the specific outcomes. 66 million years of uninterrupted evolution. 66 million years of evolution is not an abstract concept. It is a measurable, concrete thing. We know what 66 million years of evolution looks like because we can see it in the fossil record of our own world. The mammals of the early Paleocene were small, simple creatures, rat-sized and shrew-like, with relatively simple teeth and relatively small brains. 66 million years later, those simple creatures had become whales and elephants and bats and primates and every other mammal alive today, a range of body sizes, ecological strategies, intellectual capabilities, and physical forms that spans an astonishing range. What would 66 million years of dinosaur evolution look like? We cannot answer this question with certainty. Evolution is contingent, and we cannot predict the specific forms that would have arisen from specific ancestral populations under specific selective pressures. But we can make educated observations, drawing on what we know about evolutionary rates in dinosaurs, about the ecological pressures they were facing, about the evolutionary trajectories they were already on at the time of the impact, and about general principles of evolutionary biology that apply regardless of the specific organisms involved. One of the most important general principles is Cope's rule, the observation that animal lineages tend to evolve larger body sizes over time, as larger body size confers advantages in predator-prey interactions, in thermoregulation, in resource competition, and in reproductive success. Cope's rule is not universal. There are many exceptions, but it is a real statistical tendency, and it would have operated on the dinosaurs as it has operated on every other major animal group. In the context of dinosaurs, Cope's rule would likely have produced, over 66 million years, some lineages of truly enormous size. The largest sauropods of the late Cretaceous Patagotitan, Argentinosaurus, Dreadnoughtus, were already at the edge of what seems physically possible for a land animal, constrained by the strength of bone and the efficiency of the circulatory and respiratory systems. But those constraints are not absolute. They are engineering problems, and evolution is a very good engineer given sufficient time. In 66 million years, some sauropod lineage might have found solutions to the engineering problems that limit size in today's animals, more efficient respiratory systems, different skeletal architectures, different metabolic strategies that would have allowed body sizes beyond anything we can currently conceive of. Equally important to Cope's rule, and perhaps more interesting in terms of what the dinosaur world might have become, is the principle of encephalization, the tendency of animal lineages, over evolutionary time, to develop larger brains relative to their body size. Encephalization is driven by the selective advantages of intelligence, the ability to learn, to plan, to communicate, to use tools, and it has operated in virtually every major vertebrate lineage that has had sufficient time to be affected by it. The mammals of the Paleocene were not notably intelligent. 66 million years later, they had produced the great apes and eventually the human lineage. What would 66 million years have done for the intelligence of the most brain-endowed dinosaurs? We will return to this question. But first, let us look at the specific groups of dinosaurs and what their 66 million year trajectories might have been. The sauropods, giants beyond imagining. The sauropods, the long-necked, plant-eating giants that are perhaps the most iconic of all dinosaurs, were already at extraordinary size in the late Cretaceous. The titanosaurs, the dominant sauropod group of the Cretaceous, included animals like Patagotitan maiorum, which weighed an estimated 69 metric tons and stretched to lengths of perhaps 37 meters. These are the largest animals ever to have walked on land in Earth's history, as far as we know. But were they the largest possible? The titanosaurs of the late Cretaceous were doing something that no land animal before or since has done in our world. They were maintaining viable populations of animals weighing 50 to 70 metric tons, requiring thousands of kilograms of vegetation per individual per day, persisting across landscapes that their own feeding must have dramatically altered. The fact that they succeeded, that titanosaurs were diverse and globally distributed in the late Cretaceous, suggests that this ecological strategy was working, and strategies that are working under continued evolutionary pressure toward larger size tend to produce yet larger forms. In the alternate timeline, the titanosaurs of the late Paleocene and Eocene might have been significantly larger than any dinosaur we know from fossils. The spread of the tropical and subtropical forests of the early Paleogene, which in our world produced the large-bodied mammals like the rhinoceros-sized brontotheres and the enormous Paraceratherium, the largest land mammal ever, would have provided a resource base for even larger sauropods. In a world where the browsing niche at extreme height was occupied by an animal with a very long neck rather than a very long neck and head, the evolutionary trajectory toward larger size might have proceeded further than it did in our world's mammals. By the Eocene, 45 million years after the hypothetical myths, there might have been sauropods weighing 100 metric tons or more, not necessarily faster or or more complex than their late Cretaceous ancestors, but simply larger, moving through the forests of the Eocene greenhouse world like living mountains, their footsteps shaking the ground, their passage through the forest leaving trails of broken branches and stripped bark that would persist for years. The ecology of these supergiants would have shaped the forest differently than any modern ecosystem. The largest modern land animal, the African elephant, is a major ecosystem engineer, transforming forest into savanna and savanna into grassland through its browsing and its physical destruction of vegetation. A 1,000-ton sauropod would be an ecosystem engineer of incomparably greater magnitude. Its feeding would open large gaps in the forest canopy. Its movement would compact soil and create paths and clearings. Its dung, depositing tens of kilograms of nutrient-rich material per day, would fertilize patches of the forest floor in ways that other plants would exploit. The super sauropod would create, in its wake, a mosaic of habitats: the dense forest where it had not recently fed, the open, light-filled clearings where it had, and the strip of transition between them, each habitat with its own community of animals and plants. The smaller sauropods would also have continued. Not all sauropods in the alternate timeline would have evolved toward gigantism. Island populations and the Paleogene world had many islands, created by the changing sea levels and the rifting of the continents, would have evolved dwarfism, as island populations of large animals generally do. We already know this happened in the Cretaceous. There were dwarf sauropods on the islands of the Tethys, notably the remarkable Magorosaurus of what is now Romania, a titanosaur that had dwarfed to the size of a horse from ancestors that weighed many times more. In the archipelagos of the Paleogene and Neogene worlds, the islands created by the flooding of continental margins, the rifting of continents, the volcanic island chains of the Pacific, there would be dwarf sauropods, animals the size of horses or cattle, browsing the island vegetation, their bodies miniaturized by 10 or 20 million years of selection for smaller size in resource-limited island environments. These dwarf sauropods would be as remarkable in their own way as their giant mainland relatives, extraordinary evolutionary experiments in miniaturization, parallel to the dwarf elephants and dwarf hippos that appeared on Mediterranean islands in our world's Pleistocene. The theropods, intelligence at the edge of possibility. Of all the dinosaur groups, the theropods are the most relevant to questions about intelligence and the possibility of a cognitive revolution in the alternate timeline. The theropods were already, by the late Cretaceous, the most encephalized, non-avian dinosaurs, the group with the largest brains relative to their body size, the group most likely to exhibit complex behaviors, and the group from which in our own timeline birds evolved, producing the most cognitively capable non-mammalian vertebrates alive today. The encephalization quotient, a measure of brain size relative to body size, corrected for the general scaling relationship between the two of late Cretaceous theropods, varied considerably. The large tyrannosaurids had relatively modest encephalization quotients, comparable to large modern reptiles, because their brains did not scale up proportionally with their enormous body sizes. But the smaller theropods, the troodontids and the dromaeosaurs, had encephalization quotients that were significantly higher, approaching those of some modern birds. The troodontids are particularly interesting in this context. Troodon formosus, the best-known troodontid, from the Campanian of North America, had a brain that was large for a non-avian dinosaur, with expanded regions associated with vision and balance and sensory processing. It had forward-facing eyes, providing good binocular vision and therefore good depth perception. It had grasping hands with opposable-like functionality. It was probably warm-blooded. It may have had feathers. In many respects, it was already moving in the direction of the cognitive and physical toolkit that intelligence requires. 66 million years of evolution, under continued pressure toward greater intelligence from predator-prey coevolution, from social competition, from the increasing complexity of the environments created by the spreading angiosperms, would have done something significant to the troodontid lineage. The selective pressure toward intelligence in predators is well documented. Predators need to anticipate the behavior of their prey that are more behaviorally complex, prey that learn, that communicate, that adopt new strategies, impose selection for greater intelligence in predators. In the alternate Cretaceous world, the hadrosaurs and ceratopsians were already showing evidence of complex social behavior. The elaborate crests of hadrosaurs that functioned as resonating chambers for social calls, the extraordinary variety of ceratopsian facial ornamentation that was almost certainly driven by sexual selection and social recognition. Animals with complex social lives impose selection pressure on their predators to understand and exploit social behavior, which selects for intelligence. In 66 million years, under these pressures, the troodontid lineage, or one of the other small, already encephalized theropod lineages, might have undergone a cognitive radiation comparable to the primate radiation of our world's Cenozoic, beginning with animals that were already relatively intelligent by late Cretaceous standards. 66 million years of selection for greater intelligence might have produced theropods whose cognitive capabilities approached or matched those of the great apes of our world. And from there, if the right ecological circumstances aligned possibly further, we will return to this extraordinary possibility in its own section. But first, let us look at the other major dinosaur groups and their likely trajectories. The hadrosaurs in the herbivore world. The hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, the most abundant and diverse large herbivores of the late Cretaceous, were, in many respects, the cows and horses of their world. They were grazers and browsers, moving in large herds, their social lives complex enough to have driven the evolution of elaborate crests and the resonating chambers within those crests that allowed them to produce loud, distinctive calls. They were the prey base for the large tyrannosaurids, and their sheer abundance. Fossil sites in Alberta preserve hadrosaur remains by the thousands, suggesting herds of hundreds or thousands of animals was the ecological foundation of the late Cretaceous food web. In the alternate timeline, the hadrosaurs would have faced a new challenge and a new opportunity in the Paleogene, the spread of grasses. Grasses appeared in the fossil record in the late Cretaceous, and in our world they spread to become globally dominant in the Eocene and Miocene, covering the great grasslands of every continent and driving the evolution of the hypsodont herbivores, the horses and bison and antelope that could deal with the silica-rich, abrasive grass leaves with their high-crowned, cement-reinforced teeth. The hadrosaurs already had extraordinary dental batteries, hundreds of teeth packed into a complex grinding surface, replacing continuously as the teeth wore down. This dental system was highly effective for processing tough, fibrous vegetation, and it was better pre-adapted for grass eating than any mammalian tooth of the early Paleogene. When the grasses spread, the hadrosaurs would have been ready. The hadrosaurs of the alternate Eocene and Oligocene might have been the grazers of the open grasslands, filling the niche that horses and bison fill in our world, evolving longer legs for running on the flat, open plains, evolving more complex social structures for detecting and evading predators in open country, evolving more sophisticated communication to coordinate herd movements over large distances. In 66 million years, the hadrosaur lineage might have diversified into a family of grazing animals as varied as the bovids of our world, ranging from small, gazelle-like forms in the more arid grasslands to heavy, bison-like forms in the productive temperate grasslands, each species with its own ecological niche and its own behavioral repertoire. The more heavily built hadrosaurs might have become the ecological equivalents of rhinoceroses and hippos, large, relatively solitary, less dependent on herding behavior, occupying the wetland margins and the river floodplains where their ancestral lineage had lived in the Cretaceous. These large, solitary hadrosaurs would have been formidable animals, too large and too well defended for most predators to take on directly, their enormous size and their territorial behavior making them the dominant animals of the riverbank and the lakeshore. The ceratopsians. Diversity without end. The ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, with Triceratops as their most famous representative, were, at the time of the late Cretaceous, already extraordinary in their diversity of facial ornamentation. The frills and horns of different ceratopsian species varied so enormously, from the simple nasal horn of Protoceratops to the three-horned magnificence of Triceratops, to the elaborate frill bosses and multiple horns of Protoceratops, Styracosaurus and Cosmoceratops, that it is clear sexual selection was operating on ceratopsian appearance with the same intensity that it operates on the plumage of birds of paradise in our world. Sexual selection is one of the most powerful drivers of evolutionary change. It can produce extraordinary structures that would be maladaptive from a purely survival perspective, but that are maintained by the preference of one sex for the most elaborate examples in the other, in relatively short evolutionary time. The peacock's tail, the elk's antlers, the mandrill's face, all are products of sexual selection, operating on structures that were initially modest and have been elaborated over millions of years. In 66 million years, sexual selection operating on ceratopsian frills and horns might have produced forms of extraordinary, almost incredible ornamentation. The frills might have become larger, more colorful, more complex in their patterns. The horns might have become longer, more curved, more elaborate in their arrangement. The sheer variety of ceratopsian facial morphology, already remarkable in the late Cretaceous, might have expanded to the point where different species are almost unrecognizable as members of the same group, as different from each other as a peacock is from a cassowary. But sexual selection does not operate in isolation from ecological pressures. The ceratopsians would also have been evolving in response to their changing food resources and their changing predators. As the grasslands spread in the alternate Paleogene, the ceratopsians that could exploit grass would have diversified. Their beak, already effective for cropping tough vegetation, was well suited for grass cropping, and their dental batteries, while less elaborate than those of the hadrosaurs, could have been refined for grass processing. The ceratopsians of the alternate Miocene might have been the sheep and goats of the dinosaur world, cropping grazers of the more arid grasslands, their horns and frills used for both sexual display and for defense against the large theropod predators that would have evolved alongside them. The small ones, the dinosaurs, we forget. When we imagine the world of the dinosaurs, we tend to imagine the giants, the sauropods, and the tyrannosaurs, and the triceratops. But the dinosaur fauna of the late Cretaceous was not dominated by giants any more than the modern fauna is dominated by elephants and blue whales. Most dinosaur species were small, the size of turkeys and geese, and small dogs, filling the ecological roles of small and medium-sized vertebrates, just as mammals and birds fill those roles today. These small dinosaurs, the small dromaeosaurs, and troodontids, and oviraptorosaurs, and dozens of other groups, are the ones that carry the most potential for dramatic evolutionary change in the alternate timeline. Small body size, short generation times, relatively large populations, all of these characteristics promote rapid evolution, and small dinosaurs were already showing, in the late Cretaceous, the range of ecological strategies that might be expected of a successful small animal fauna: insectivory, omnivory, seed-eating, fish-eating, egg-eating, scavenging. The oviraptorosaurs, a group of feathered theropods with toothless beaks and elaborate head crests, were already diverse in the late Cretaceous, ranging from small, turkey-sized animals to the enormous Gigantoraptor, which weighed an estimated 1.4 metric tons. They were probably omnivores, their toothless beaks capable of processing a wide range of food items including seeds, fruits, invertebrates, and small vertebrates. In the alternate timeline, the oviraptorosaurs might have become the major seed-eating and fruit-eating clade of the dinosaur world, filling the niche that parrots and pigeons and finches fill in our world's bird fauna, but at larger body sizes and with the greater ecological impact of larger animals. The small dromaeosaurs and troodontids, already the most cognitively capable of the non-avian dinosaurs, would have continued their evolution toward greater intelligence and greater behavioral complexity. In 66 million years, these lineages might have produced animals with the intelligence and social complexity of modern ravens or crows, animals capable of tool use and social learning, and the kind of innovation that allows populations to adopt new behaviors without waiting for genetic change. These small, intelligent theropods might have developed relationships with other animals, mutualistic relationships, parasitic relationships, relationships of tolerated coexistence that added complexity to the social landscape of the alternate world in ways we can only imagine. The troodontids of the alternate Eocene might have been as ubiquitous and as behaviorally complex as corvids are in our world, present in every habitat, exploiting every food source, their intelligence allowing them to succeed where more specialized animals failed. The mammals that would have stayed small in our world, the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs, was the event that allowed the mammals to diversify from their small, nocturnal, insectivorous ancestors into the enormous range of body sizes and ecological roles that characterizes the mammalian fauna today. The removal of the dinosaurs cleared the ecological stage for the mammals. Without that clearing, the mammals might never have had the opportunity to become large, to become diverse, to become dominant. In the alternate timeline where the asteroid misses and the dinosaurs live, the mammals do not go extinct. But neither do they radiate dramatically. They remain constrained to the ecological roles that the dinosaurs leave for them: small-bodied insectivores and seed-eaters and fruit-eaters and scavengers, living in the nocturnal, and the underground and the arboreal niches that the larger, more active dinosaurs do not exploit efficiently. This is not a small space. The mammals of our world's late Mesozoic were already diverse and sophisticated within their ecological constraints. There were gliding mammals and swimming mammals and burrowing mammals and climbing mammals, all small in body but varied in their ecological strategies. These strategies would have continued in the alternate timeline, elaborated and refined over 66 million years of evolution without the opportunity for gigantism that the dinosaur extinction provided. The primates, or rather their ancestors, the small, arboreal, insectivorous mammals that would eventually, in our world, become primates, would have developed in the trees of the alternate Paleogene world. The arboreal niche is one that dinosaurs have never exploited very efficiently. Even the tree-climbing dinosaurs of the Mesozoic, like Microraptor, were small and specialized, not true canopy dwellers in the way that modern squirrels and monkeys are. The trees of the alternate Paleogene would have been full of small mammals, exploiting the fruits and seeds and insects of the flowering plants that continued to diversify in the New World. These arboreal mammals might have evolved over 66 million years in directions we can only guess at, better grasping hands, as the primate lineage did in our world, better color vision, driven by the need to find ripe fruit in a complex canopy, larger brains, as the cognitive demands of navigating a three-dimensional arboreal environment selected for spatial reasoning and social intelligence. But without the opportunity to come down from the trees and expand into the large-bodied terrestrial niches which were all occupied by dinosaurs, the arboreal mammals would have remained arboreal. The bats would almost certainly have appeared in the alternate timeline, as they appeared in our own world in the early Eocene. The niche of nocturnal flying insectivore was available, and it was a niche that the dinosaurs, even the feathered, possibly flying small theropods, had not fully exploited. Echolocation, which allows bats to navigate and hunt in total darkness, is an extraordinary evolutionary innovation, and it was available to mammalian lineages through the same evolutionary processes that produced it in our world. The bats of the alternate timeline would have been one of the success stories of the mammalian fauna, small, highly specialized, numerous, and global in distribution. The marine mammals of the alternate timeline are more uncertain. In our world, the return of large mammals to the sea, producing whales, dolphins, sirenians, pinnipeds, was made possible by the availability of marine niches left open by the extinction of the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous. In the alternate timeline, the marine reptiles did not go extinct, and the open ocean predator and large marine herbivore niches would have remained occupied. The mammals of the alternate timeline would have had less ecological incentive to return to the sea, and the specific marine lineages that evolved would have been different, perhaps smaller, more specialized, exploiting niches not fully occupied by the marine reptiles. The rodents, the most species-rich mammalian order in our world, would probably have appeared in the alternate timeline as well, because the niche of small, generalist, rapidly reproducing herbivore and omnivore is one that is available in virtually any terrestrial ecosystem, and that small mammals are well positioned to exploit. But in a world where large herbivore niches were occupied by dinosaurs, the rodent equivalents of the alternate timeline would have remained small. No capybaras, no beavers, no marmots. The The ecological roles that these medium to large rodents fill in our world would have been filled by small dinosaurs. The oceans without the catastrophe, the oceans of the alternate timeline would be, in some ways, the most dramatically different from those of our world. The end Cretaceous extinction was, if anything, even more devastating in the marine realm than on land. Approximately 75% of marine species went extinct, including not just the mosasaurs and the plesiosaurs, and the ammonoids and the belemnites, but enormous numbers of planktonic species and benthic invertebrates and fish. In the alternate timeline, all of these survived, and their 66 million year evolutionary trajectories would have produced an ocean utterly unlike the one we swim in today. The mosasaurs would have continued. These marine lizards, relatives of modern monitor lizards, but fully adapted to a marine existence with paddle-like limbs and a deep, powerful tail, were the dominant, large predators of the late Cretaceous seas. They ranged from small, fish-eating species a few meters long to enormous apex predators like Mosasaurus hoffmanni, which reached 12 to 17 meters in length and preyed on anything it could catch, including smaller mosasaurs. In 66 million more years, the mosasaur lineage might have produced animals even larger 20-meter giants, or animals specialized for deep diving, or forms adapted to polar seas, or ambush predators lurking in the shallow reef zones. The plesiosaurs would have continued. The two great plesiosaur lineages, the long-necked plesiosaurs proper and the short-necked, large-headed plesiosaurs, were both present in the late Cretaceous. In our world, the pliosaurs declined before the impact, and the plesiosaurs persisted until the end. In the alternate timeline, both lineages would have continued, diversifying into the new ecological opportunities of the Paleogene Ocean. The long-necked plesiosaurs might have become even more specialized for their feeding strategy, whatever it was, still debated, possibly filter feeding, possibly fish catching in shallow water, possibly deep diving. The pliosaurs might have evolved into the apex predators of the open ocean, competing with the mosasaurs and driving the evolution of new body forms in both lineages. The ammonoids, the spiral-shelled cephalopods that had survived every previous extinction event and had recovered magnificently from each one, would have continued in the alternate timeline. In our world, the ammonoids went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous, leaving only the nautilus as the sole surviving representative of externally shelled cephalopods. In the alternate timeline, the ammonoids would have continued their long evolutionary history, diversifying into new forms in the Paleogene seas. After 66 million years of evolution, the ammonoids of the alternate present might be as diverse as the mollusks of our world, ranging from small, snail-sized species to large, open ocean predators with shells a meter across. The belemnites, the squid-like cephalopods that were also lost at the end of the Cretaceous in our world, would similarly have continued. The belemnites of the alternate timeline, 66 million years, evolved from their late Cretaceous ancestors, might have become as diverse as the modern cephalopods, as different from their ancestors as a modern octopus is from its Devonian precursors. The fish of the alternate ocean would be different from those of our world. The teleost fish, the ray-finned fish that constitute the majority of modern fish species, were already diversifying in the late Cretaceous and would have continued regardless of the asteroid. But their diversification would have been constrained by the presence of the large marine reptiles that continued to occupy the apex predator roles. The large fish of the alternate ocean might be somewhat somewhat different in character from those of our world, perhaps less likely to reach very large sizes in the open ocean, where the mosasaurs would be the dominant large predators, perhaps more diverse in the reef environments and the shallow coastal zones. The coral reefs of the alternate world would have continued their evolution from the late Cretaceous starting point, the warm, well-oxygenated, diverse reefs of the Tethys and the tropical Panthalassa. Without the impact winter and the ocean acidification of the end Cretaceous event, the reef ecosystems would have had 66 million uninterrupted years of evolution. The alternate reefs would be as different from modern reefs as modern reefs are from the reefs of the Ordovician, recognizably reef ecosystems, built by corals and inhabited by diverse invertebrates and fish, but constituted of different species, organized around different ecological relationships, reaching different levels of complexity in different ways. The skies of a dinosaur world, the skies of the alternate world, would be dominated in the first few million years by pterosaurs. The late Cretaceous pterosaurs, particularly the enormous azhdarchids, were at the peak of their evolutionary radiation, and without the impact, they would have continued to evolve. But the pterosaurs had, in our world's late Cretaceous, already been significantly displaced from smaller ecological niches by the birds. The early birds, the enantiornithines and the ornithorans of the late Cretaceous, were more maneuverable, metabolically efficient, and behaviorally complex than the pterosaurs, and they had been filling the small and medium-sized aerial ecological niches at the expense of the pterosaurs since the early Cretaceous. In the alternate timeline, this competition would have continued. The long-term trajectory of pterosaur evolution in a world where they survived might have been toward further gigantism in the large soaring niches where their structural advantages over birds were most pronounced, and further reduction in the smaller niches where the birds were outcompeting them. The alternate Eocene might have had azhdarchid-like pterosaurs with wingspans of 15 meters or more, true sky giants, while the smaller niches were increasingly dominated by the bird lineage. The birds of the alternate timeline would be both familiar and strange. The bird lineage in our world had already diversified significantly by the late Cretaceous, and the post-Cretaceous radiation of modern birds was built on the foundation of that earlier diversity. In the alternate timeline, the birds would have continued diversifying, but in a world where the ecological roles available to them were different from those in our world. Without the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs, the large terrestrial herbivore and carnivore niches were occupied. The birds would not have been able to expand into these niches the way they did in isolated island ecosystems in our world, producing the moas of New Zealand, the elephant birds of Madagascar, the terror birds of South America. Instead, the birds of the alternate timeline would have remained concentrated in the niches they had evolved to exploit. Aerial insectivory, aerial predation on small vertebrates, small seed eating, coastal and marine feeding. But these niches, elaborated over 66 million years, might have produced bird lineages of extraordinary diversity and specialization. The aerial insectivores might have developed echolocation, converging on the bat strategy from the avian lineage. The aerial predators might have evolved larger sizes, competing with the smaller pterosaurs for the medium-sized aerial predator niche. The seed-eating birds might have developed complex tool use, driven by the increasing variety and toughness of the seeds produced by the continued angiosperm radiation. The forests that would have grown, the forests of the alternate world, would be the product of 66 million more years of coevolution between plants and the animals that depend on them, the dinosaurian browsers and grazers. the insect pollinators, the small mammalian seed dispersers, the avian seed dispersers, and eventually, possibly, the large-brained theropods that would have been the ecological equivalent of the primates in their relationship with the forest. The angiosperms, the flowering plants, would have continued their diversification, driven by the same forces that have driven them in our world. Coevolution with pollinators, competition among plant species for light and nutrients, the arms races between plants and the herbivores that eat them. The flowers of the alternate world might be different from ours in detail, the specific pollinator relationships, the specific coevolutionary partnerships, but the fundamental innovation of the flower and the fruit and the seed would be just as present, just as productive. The spread of grasses, which in our world occurred in the Eocene and Miocene, would have occurred in the alternate timeline as well. Grasses are successful precisely because they are adapted to the disturbance and the grazing pressure that large herbivores create, and the large herbivorous dinosaurs of the alternate world would have created that disturbance and that pressure. The alternate grasslands might have appeared earlier than our world's grasslands, because the hadrosaurs and ceratopsians of the alternate early Paleogene might have been more intense grazers than the early mammals of our world's Paleogene. The forests of the alternate world at tree scale would have been shaped profoundly by the giant sauropods. A forest regularly traversed by animals weighing tens or hundreds of metric tons would be physically different from any modern forest. The trees that survived would be those with the most resilient root systems, the toughest bark, the most rapid response to physical damage. The gaps created by the passage of the sauropods would be colonized by fast-growing pioneer plants, exactly the strategy of the light-demanding, early successional angiosperms that are already so successful in our world. The alternate forest would be a more dynamic, more gap-filled, more structurally complex landscape than any modern forest, shaped by disturbance forces that have no modern equivalent. The trees themselves might have evolved different strategies in response to the pressure of the giant sauropods. In our world, the coevolution of trees with the animals that eat them has produced an enormous variety of defensive strategies: thorns, toxic compounds, tough bark, unpalatable leaves, seeds encased in hard shells. The trees of the alternate world, co-evolving with animals that could reach higher and exert greater physical force than any modern browsing mammal, might have evolved defenses of extreme intensity, trunks of unusual toughness, leaves at heights accessible only to the smallest sauropods, chemical defenses of a potency unmatched in any modern flora. The continents in motion. Regardless of the asteroid, the Earth's plates continue to move. This is perhaps the most important thing to remember about the alternate timeline. The geological forces that reshape the planet operate on timescales of millions of years and are utterly indifferent to the biological events that happen on the surface. The plates move, the mountains rise and erode, the sea levels change, the ocean basins open and close. All of this would happen in the alternate timeline, on exactly the same schedule as in our own. The Deccan traps the vast outpouring of lava in what is now India, which was already erupting at the time of the Chicxulub impact, would have continued in the alternate timeline. In our world, there is debate about how much the Deccan eruptions contributed to the end Cretaceous extinction. They certainly released significant quantities of CO2 and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, and they may have already been stressing ecosystems before the asteroid arrived. In the alternate timeline, without the asteroid to mask their effects, the Deccan eruptions would have been the dominant disturbance of the late Maastrichtian and early Paleocene. They might have caused a significant but non-catastrophic environmental perturbation, a warming episode, some degree of ocean acidification, some stress on the ecosystems nearest to the eruption site, but not the catastrophic collapse that the asteroid produced. India would still have collided with Asia. This collision, which in our world produced the Himalayas, began around 50 million years ago and has been ongoing since. Would have happened in the alternate timeline on the same schedule. The Himalayas would rise, the Tibetan Plateau would form, the climate of Asia would be transformed, the Asian monsoon strengthened and reorganized by the presence of the vast plateau and the long mountain chain. The fauna of Asia would be divided by the rising mountains, with different species evolving on either side of the new barrier. The Himalayas of the alternate world would be inhabited by altitude-adapted dinosaurs rather than altitude-adapted mammals. The high Himalayas, with their thin air and their extreme cold, would represent an evolutionary challenge for the dinosaurs, just as they do for mammals and birds in our world. Small, heavily insulated, possibly hibernating dinosaurs might have evolved for the high-altitude niches. The theropods of the Himalayan foothills might have developed thicker feather coats in response to the cold. Australia would have separated from Antarctica and moved northward, as it did in our world. The Australian fauna, isolated from the rest of the world, would have evolved in its own distinctive direction, as Australian fauna always does. The marsupials in our world became the dominant Australian mammals, precisely because they arrived before the placental mammals and had time to diversify in isolation. In the alternate timeline, the Australian fauna would be a distinctive assemblage of dinosaurs and small mammals, isolated for tens of millions of years, evolving in unique directions that reflect the peculiarities of the Australian environment. The opening of the Drake Passage, the seaway between South America and Antarctica that allowed the Antarctic circumpolar current to develop, would have proceeded in the alternate timeline, as in our own, on roughly the same geological schedule. The Antarctic circumpolar current, which in our world is responsible for the isolation and cooling of Antarctica that eventually produced the Antarctic ice sheet, would have had the same effect in the alternate timeline. Antarctica would have cooled, the sea ice would have expanded, and the ecosystems of the Southern Ocean would have been transformed by the new circulation pattern. What intelligence might have become? This is the question that captures the imagination most powerfully, the question that sits at the center of the alternate timeline and gives it its most profound philosophical dimension. If the dinosaurs had survived for 66 million more years, would intelligence have evolved? Would there be, in the world of the alternate present, creatures capable of the kind of abstract thought and cultural transmission that characterizes human civilization? The honest answer is, we don't know, but we can think carefully about what we do know, and from that careful thinking, we can construct a range of possibilities that are more or less plausible. The evolution of human-level intelligence in our world was not inevitable. It was the product of a very specific sequence of events. The evolution of bipedalism in the Australopithecine lineage, which freed the hands for tool use. The evolution of precision grip, which allowed fine manipulation. The dramatic expansion of the brain over the last 2 to 3 million years, driven by a combination of tool use, social complexity, language, and the feedback loops between these factors, and the development of language itself, which allowed the transmission of learned behaviors across generations and the cumulative buildup of culture. None of these specific events would necessarily have occurred in a dinosaur lineage. The specific evolutionary pathway to human intelligence was contingent on the specific characteristics of the primate lineage and the specific ecological pressures that the early hominins faced in the African savanna. Different starting conditions would produce different evolutionary pathways, even if the destination high intelligence was the same. But here is the key insight. Intelligence is a convergent evolutionary strategy. It has evolved independently in multiple lineages in our world, in primates, in cetaceans, in corvids, in cephalopods, in elephants, because it is a powerful general strategy for dealing with complex, variable environments. The fact that so many different animal lineages have converged on high intelligence from very different starting points suggests that intelligence is not a fluke. It is a basin of attraction in evolutionary space, a strategy that evolution tends to find, given sufficient time and the right ecological pressures. The troodontids of the late Cretaceous were small, feathered, warm-blooded theropods with forward-facing eyes, grasping hands, and brains that were large by non-avian dinosaur standards. They were already, in a sense, exploring the cognitive end of the theropod evolutionary spectrum. In 66 million more years, under continued selective pressure for intelligence from predator-prey arms races, from social competition, from the exploitation of complex forest environments, from the demands of dealing with the increasingly varied and behaviorally sophisticated fauna of the alternate world, the troodontid lineage might have undergone a cognitive revolution. The cognitive revolution would not necessarily look like the human cognitive revolution. The specific form that high intelligence takes is shaped by the specific evolutionary history of the lineage that develops it. Octopus intelligence is organized very differently from primate intelligence. Corvid intelligence is organized very differently from cetacean intelligence. The intelligence of a theropod dinosaur lineage, with its specific sensory systems, its specific social structure, its specific relationship to the physical world, would have a character that we can barely imagine from our primate-centric perspective. But some things we can say with reasonable confidence. A theropod intelligence would be strongly visual. The theropods had large, forward-facing eyes with good color vision, and their brains would have expanded first in regions associated with visual processing. It would be strongly social, the social complexity of theropod groups, already evident in the pack-hunting behavior of some dromaeosaurs and in the apparent family structure of some oviraptorosaurs, and would have been the driver of social intelligence in the same way that primate social complexity drove the evolution of primate intelligence, and it would be strongly tool-using the grasping hands of the theropods, which they had already used for seizing prey, would have been the substrate for the evolution of object manipulation and eventually tool use. Given these starting conditions, the theropod intelligence of the alternate Miocene, perhaps 20 to 30 million years after the hypothetical miss, might have reached the level of the great apes of our world, animals capable of tool use, of social learning, of complex communication, of some degree of symbolic thought, not yet capable of language, not yet capable of cumulative cultural evolution, but approaching the threshold, and if that threshold were crossed, if, in the alternate Pliocene or Pleistocene, some lineage of small, intelligent, tool-using theropods developed the rudiments of language, then the subsequent trajectory might have accelerated dramatically, as it did in the human lineage. Language allows the transmission of learned behaviors across generations. Cultural evolution can then proceed far faster than genetic evolution, and the feedback loops between language and tool use and social complexity and environmental modification might have produced, in the alternate present, something that we would recognize from a great distance and with significant reservations as a technological civilization. The Dinosauroid question. In 1982, the Canadian paleontologist Dale Russell and his colleague Ron Seguin proposed a thought experiment that has haunted paleontology ever since. They imagined what a troodontid dinosaur might have looked like if it had continued to evolve toward greater intelligence, if the lineage that had been moving toward larger brains and more complex behavior had continued on that trajectory for tens of millions of years. The result of their thought experiment was the Dinosauroid, a hypothetical descendant of Troodon, bipedal, large-brained, with a large cranium housing a brain of human-like proportions, with forelimbs modified for fine manipulation, with a forward-facing visage and large eyes. It looked, somewhat disturbingly, like a scaled, greenish humanoid, a dinosaur that had, through the convergent pressures of intelligence, arrived at a form reminiscent of the form that intelligence produced in the primate lineage. The dinosauroid concept has been criticized fairly for being too anthropocentric. Russell and Seguin assumed that the demands of intelligence would inevitably produce a human-like form, because they were imagining intelligence from the perspective of beings for whom intelligence takes a human form. But intelligence does not require a human body. The octopus has very high intelligence, and no body plan resembling ours at all. The crow has remarkable cognitive capabilities in a body utterly unlike a human's. There is no reason to think that the intelligent theropod of the alternate timeline would look like a biped with a large cranium and manipulative forelimbs. What it might look like is genuinely uncertain, but we can make some observations. Theropods were already bipedal, which frees the forelimbs for other uses, including manipulation. The forelimbs of theropods were already grasping appendages, not walking limbs, and they were already capable of fine manipulation in some species. The brain case of theropods expanded relatively easily in the evolutionary record. We can trace the expansion of brain size in the bird lineage, from the small brains of early theropods to the large brains of modern crows and parrots. There is no anatomical barrier to the evolution of a very large brain in a theropod body. The intelligent theropod of the alternate world might have retained much of its ancestral appearance, a feathered, bipedal animal, recognizably descended from the troodontids of the late Cretaceous, but with a larger head, larger eyes, more dexterous hands, and a behavioral repertoire of extraordinary complexity. It might have been unrecognizable as intelligent to a human observer who did not know what to look for until it started using tools, or communicating in ways that were clearly linguistic, or modifying its environment in ways that only intelligence can produce. The transition to tool use would have been gradual, as all evolutionary transitions are. The first tools of the alternate world's intelligent theropods might have been stones used to crack shells, or sticks used to reach prey in crevices, or leaves used to carry water. These are exactly the kinds of tool use we see in the most intelligent modern animals: corvids, great apes, capuchin monkeys, and they are within the reach of any animal with good manual dexterity, binocular vision, and a sufficiently large brain. Once tool use begins, the feedback loops. It creates tools, allow access to new food sources, which supports larger populations, which increases the selection pressure for intelligence, which produces better tool use, can accelerate the development of intelligence dramatically. The timeline of intelligence development in the alternate world is deeply uncertain. It might have happened much earlier than the human intelligence of our world if the right ecological pressures arose. It might have happened much later if the dinosaurs remained ecologically dominant in ways that reduced the selection pressure for intelligence. It might have happened in multiple independent lineages, simultaneously producing a world with several intelligent species, rather than the single intelligent species that has dominated our world for the last 100,000 years. Or it might not have happened at all. Intelligence is convergent, but it is not inevitable, and there are plausible alternate worlds in which no dinosaur lineage ever achieves the cognitive threshold, cities without humans. Let us take the boldest possibility seriously for a moment. Suppose that an intelligent theropod lineage did develop over 66 million years to the point of technology. Suppose that sometime in the alternate Pliocene or Pleistocene, perhaps 5 million years ago, perhaps 1 million years ago, a lineage of small, intelligent, tool-using, language-capable theropods began the transition from nomadic foraging to settled communities, from stone tools to agriculture, from agriculture to cities. What would those cities look like? The form of a city is shaped by the form of its builders. Human cities are built around the needs and capabilities of the human body. Rooms sized for upright bipeds, doors at a certain height, streets wide enough for vehicles that humans designed for human-sized cargo, staircases with risers calibrated to human leg length. A city built by intelligent theropods would be sized and shaped differently because the theropod body, even after 66 million years of evolution toward intelligence, would be different from the human body in important ways. Theropods are naturally bipedal, but their posture is different from human posture. Where humans stand with a nearly vertical spine, theropods hold their spines roughly horizontal, balanced at the hips, with the tail as a counterweight and the head extended forward. This posture would produce different ergonomic requirements. Doorways might be wider and lower than human doorways. Furniture, if the theropods used furniture, would be shaped around a body that prefers to crouch or squat rather than to sit upright in the human manner. The arrangement of rooms might be more horizontal, less vertically stratified, because theropods might prefer to rest on their bellies rather than on raised platforms. The materials of the theropod city would depend on what was available in the environment and on what technologies the theropods had developed. If they had developed metallurgy, the buildings might be of metal. If they had discovered the structural properties of stone, as many early human civilizations did, the buildings might be of stone, shaped by theropod-sized hands with theropod-sized tools. If they had discovered ceramics or glass or concrete, the materials of their buildings might look familiar, even if their shapes were strange. The layout of the city would be shaped by the theropod's social structure and their relationship to the surrounding landscape. If the intelligent theropods were descended from pack-hunting ancestors, as the troodontids may have been, they might have strong social bonds and a preference for dense, communal living, producing cities that were compact and highly populated. If they were descended from more solitary ancestors, their cities might be more dispersed, with greater distances between individual dwellings. The cities of the alternate world would not be human cities. They would not have been built by anything with human history or human culture or human aesthetics, but they would have been built by intelligence, by the same general faculty of abstract thought and cumulative cultural learning that built our cities. And intelligence, wherever it emerges, tends to solve similar problems in broadly similar ways: how to build shelter, how to store food, how to communicate across distances, how to organize large groups for cooperative tasks. The solutions, the theropods, found to these problems would be different in detail from the solutions humans found, but they would be solutions, and the civilization built on those solutions might be, in some ways, recognizable. Technology without primates. Human technology has a specific character that is shaped by the specific capabilities and limitations of human hands. The precision grip, the ability to hold a tool between the thumb and forefinger, applying force in a precise and controlled manner, is the foundation of most human technology. From the stone hand axe of the early Paleolithic to the surgical scalpel and the fiber optic cable, human technology is built around the extraordinary precision and strength of the human hand. A theropod technology would have a different character, shaped by the capabilities of the theropod forelimb. The forelimbs of small theropods were already capable of grasping. This was their primary function, seizing prey, and in an intelligent, tool-using descendant, they would be capable of fine manipulation. But the specific details of the grip, the specific range of motion, the specific force application would be different from human hands. The tools that resulted would be optimized for different movements, different forces, different applications of mechanical advantage. The weapons of a theropod technology would be interesting. Theropods are predators, descended from predators, with the reflexes and spatial awareness of predators. Their weapons technology might be more advanced, earlier in their technological development than that of humans, who are omnivores, descended from frugivorous primates, with less inherent predatory spatial awareness. Alternatively, a highly social, intelligent predator might be less violent than humans. The coevolution of intelligence and cooperation might have produced theropods who had resolved the problem of intraspecific violence more completely than humans have. The agricultural technology of the theropods would depend on what they were growing. If they developed agriculture, and this is not inevitable, as we noted, it would be based on the food plants of the alternate world, which would be different from the food plants of our world. The grasses that produced wheat and rice and corn in our world are specific to our world's evolutionary history. The alternate world's equivalent crops would be the seeds and fruits and tubers of the alternate world's dominant angiosperms, which might be very different plants. The alternate agriculture would produce very different foods in very different quantities, requiring very different technologies to cultivate and process. The architecture of the theropods would be shaped by the materials available in their environment and by the aesthetic sensibilities of their specific culture, which is entirely unpredictable from first principles. Human architecture is both functional and aesthetic, shaped by structural requirements and by cultural preferences for certain forms, proportions, and decorative elements. Theropod architecture would be the same functional and aesthetic, but the functional requirements and the aesthetic preferences would be those of theropods, not humans. We cannot predict the aesthetic sensibilities of a species we have never met. What we can say is that the technology of a theropod civilization, given 66 million years of evolutionary development and perhaps 10,000 years of cumulative cultural development, might reach levels comparable to human technology at some point in their history. The specific applications, the specific tools, the specific materials, all would be different, but the general trajectory from stone tools to agriculture to metallurgy to complex engineering to Eventually, the manipulation of energy and information at scales that have the potential to transform the planet might be broadly similar, because the trajectory of technology is driven by general cognitive and ecological pressures that apply to any intelligent species. The climate of an uninterrupted world, the climate of the alternate world, the climate of a world without the end Cretaceous impact would have evolved very differently from the climate of our world over the last 66 million years. In our world, the climate of the Cenozoic has been characterized by a long-term cooling trend interrupted by warm periods and culminating in the Pleistocene ice ages that began approximately 2.6 million years ago. This cooling trend was driven by multiple factors: the opening of the Drake Passage and the resulting establishment of the Antarctic circumpolar current, the collision of India with Asia, and the rise of the Himalayas, which increased chemical weathering and drew CO2 out of the atmosphere, the spread of C4 grasses, which may have contributed to CO2 drawdown, and the changing orbital geometry that drove the Milankovitch cycles. All of these geological drivers would have operated in the alternate timeline on the same schedule. The Drake Passage would have opened, the Himalayas would have risen, the long-term cooling trend would have proceeded. The Pleistocene glaciation might still have occurred, or might have been somewhat different, because the carbon cycle of the alternate world, with its different biosphere, would have processed CO2 differently than our world's biosphere. The critical difference in the alternate climate would be the biological feedback. In our world, the mammals of the Cenozoic had an important effect on the carbon cycle. The spread of grazing mammals helped maintain the grasslands that replaced forests in many regions, and grasslands sequester carbon differently than forests. In the alternate world, the dinosaurian grazers would have had their own effects on the carbon cycle, possibly very different from those of the mammals. The giant sauropods, in particular, would have been significant methane producers. Modern ruminants produce substantial quantities of methane as a byproduct of their digestive fermentation, and this methane is a significant greenhouse gas. The sauropods, with their enormous digestive systems and their enormous body masses, would have produced prodigious quantities of methane. Some researchers have estimated that the sauropods of the Mesozoic produced enough methane to have a measurable effect on global climate. In a world where sauropods continued to exist and possibly grew even larger, this methane production would have been an ongoing source of greenhouse warming that has no equivalent in the mammal-dominated Cenozoic of our world. The result of this additional methane production might have been a somewhat warmer alternate world, not dramatically warmer, but possibly warmer enough to delay or reduce the Pleistocene glaciation. The alternate world might have gone into its own version of the Pleistocene, with somewhat less ice, somewhat milder polar conditions, somewhat less severe glacial cycles than our world experienced. Or the methane effect might have been counteracted by other feedbacks, by the greater consumption of vegetation by the giant sauropods, which might have reduced the plant cover that otherwise accumulates carbon, or by the greater rate of organic matter decomposition in a warmer, wetter world. The climate of the alternate world is one of the hardest things to predict precisely, because it depends on so many interacting factors, many of which are themselves uncertain. What we can say is that it would be different from our world's climate, probably somewhat warmer, given the sauropod methane, probably with somewhat different vegetation patterns, probably with somewhat less extreme Pleistocene glaciation, but it would still be the climate of a planet undergoing long-term geological evolution, still driven by the same fundamental processes of plate tectonics and solar energy and carbon cycling that drive our climate. It would be recognizably Earth, even if it would be an Earth where the details were different in ways that would matter enormously to any creature living in it. What we would never have known. In the alternate timeline, the world where the asteroid missed human beings do not exist. Everything that human beings have done, have thought, have created, have discovered, does not exist. The alternate world does not have Homer, or Shakespeare, or Mozart. It does not have Newton, or Darwin, or Einstein. It does not have the pyramids, or the Parthenon, or the Cathedral of Notre Dame. It does not have the theory of evolution, or the theory of relativity, or the laws of thermodynamics, or the periodic table of the elements, or the genetic code. In the alternate world, there is no one to know that 66 million years ago, a rock 10 kilometers wide passed by the Earth without hitting it. There is no one to dig up the fossils of the late Cretaceous and reconstruct the world of the dinosaurs. There is no one to look at the night sky and calculate the orbits of asteroids and wonder about near misses and alternate histories. There is no one to lie in the dark and think about the fragility of existence. Or is there? If the intelligent theropods exist, if the cognitive revolution we imagined occurred, then there is someone in the alternate world who can wonder. Someone who can look at the sky and understand it, who can dig in the rock and find the fossils of their own ancestors, who can calculate the paths of asteroids and build the tools to deflect them if one comes too close. Someone who can lie in the dark and think about what might have been if a rock had hit their world 66 million years ago, and imagine a world full of small, soft, furry mammals without any dinosaurs, and find that alternate world as strange and as sad and as wonderful as we find theirs. What we would never have known in the alternate world is everything that we know, and what the alternate world's intelligence would never have known is everything that makes us who we are. The two worlds are mirror images, each containing a form of consciousness that the other lacks, each containing a history that the other cannot access, each complete in itself and irreducibly particular. This is perhaps the deepest thing about the alternate timeline. It is not better or worse than our world. It is different. A world with a different history, a different biosphere, a different form of consciousness, but a world as real, as full, as rich as ours. A world that we can imagine but cannot visit. A world that exists only in the space between the question and the answer, in the gap between the rock and the planet, in the silence after the miss. A walk through the Cretaceous future. Let us take one last walk, a slow walk, in the dreamlike manner of deep time, through the alternate present, through the world that exists tonight, in the timeline where the rock missed. We are in what would be, in our world, the temperate zone of North America, somewhere in the latitude of the modern Great Plains, though the landscape looks nothing like the modern Great Plains. There are no cities here, or there may be cities here, depending on whether the cognitive revolution of the theropods has happened and how far it has progressed. Let us say, for the peace of the journey, that we are in a region that has not been settled, a wild region, away from whatever centers of civilization may exist in the alternate world. The first thing you notice is the size of things. The trees are enormous, not uniformly enormous. There are trees of every size, as in any forest, but the largest trees are larger than any tree in our world, because 66 million more years of tree evolution, without the disturbance of the dinosaur extinction and the subsequent mammalian radiation, has produced forests of extraordinary age and stature. The canopy above is dense, broken by shafts of late afternoon light that angle down to the forest floor in golden columns, each column full of drifting particles, pollen, spores, the fine detritus of a living forest. The sound of the forest is different from any sound you have heard. There are birds recognizable as birds, their calls liquid and varied, the product of 66 million more years of avian vocal evolution. But there are other sounds too. From somewhere deeper in the forest, a deep, resonant call, a hadrosaur, perhaps its crest amplifying the sound to a bass note that you feel as much as hear, that vibrates in the chest and makes the air itself seem to throb. And further away, barely audible, a rhythmic crashing a sauropod moving through the trees, its footsteps separated by the weight of an animal that might weigh 100 tons. You walk forward. The forest floor is soft underfoot, a deep layer of leaf litter and moss, the accumulated fall of millions of years of deciduous forest. The soil beneath it, rich and dark, and alive with the organisms that decompose the leaf litter and cycle its nutrients back into the trees. The roots of the great trees emerge from the soil like the buttresses of a cathedral, spreading outward in all directions, supporting the enormous weight of trunks that in some cases are 5 or 10 meters in diameter. A movement in the undergrowth, something small the size of a crow, perhaps darts between the roots and pauses on a fallen log. It is feathered, brilliantly colored in blues and greens that catch the shaft of light, its forward-facing eyes regarding you with a intelligence that seems, somehow, to go beyond the usual animal assessment of threat or prey. It tilts its head. Its hands, yes, it has hands. 3-fingered grasping appendages on its forelimbs hold something, a seed, extracted from the fruit it has been processing. It watches you for a moment longer, then resumes its feeding, apparently deciding that you are neither threat nor prey, nor anything particularly interesting. This is a troodontid descendant, a small, intelligent, feathered theropod living in the understory of the alternate presence forest, its life organized around the same basic tasks as a crow's finding food, avoiding predators, communicating with its social group, learning from experience, and teaching what it has learned. Whether it is as intelligent as a crow, or more so, or less, you cannot tell from looking at it. But the quality of its attention, the way it assesses you and categorizes you and returns to its task, is the attention of an animal that is thinking. You walk further. The trees thin slightly at the edge of a clearing created, perhaps, by the recent passage of something very large, whose footprints you can see at the clearing's edge. Depressions in the soft earth the size of bathtubs, filled with standing water, ringed by the broken stalks of the vegetation that the animal crushed as it walked. You stand at the edge of one of these footprints and look across the clearing. On the far side, partly screened by the remaining trees, an animal is feeding. It is enormous. Its shoulder is level with the canopy of the smaller trees, and its neck, extended to reach the uppermost branches of a larger tree, adds another 10 meters or more to its height. Its skin is gray and rough, patterned with darker markings, its legs like the trunks of medium-sized trees, its tail held out behind it for balance. It moves slowly and deliberately, reaching with its neck, selecting branches, stripping them of leaves with its broad, flat teeth, chewing with a slow, lateral motion. A sauropod, a titanosaur, perhaps, or a descendant of the titanosaur lineage, larger than any sauropod you know from fossils, 100 metric tons of plant-eating machinery moving through the forest with the slow certainty of an animal that has no predators large enough to threaten it. It does not look at you. You are beneath its notice. You are smaller than its head, smaller than the branches it is stripping, an irrelevance in a world calibrated to a very different scale. The light fades. You retreat back into the forest as the sauropod continues its feeding, its neck swinging slowly back and forth in the dimming light. The hadrosaur call is closer now, a conversation between two animals, a long, resonant call answered by a slightly different tone, the two animals locating each other in the darkening forest. From somewhere above, the sound of the troodontid descendant again, not the individual you saw earlier but others, their calls quick and varied, a complex exchange that might be language, or might be the rich but non-linguistic communication of social animals, or might be something in between that our categories cannot quite capture. The stars come out, the same stars as ours, the same galaxy, the same neighboring stars, the same distant light that has been crossing the universe for millions of years to arrive tonight, but seen from a world that is not our world, from a forest that no human has ever walked in, from a clearing made by the footstep of an animal that no human eye has ever seen. The alternate world lies around you in the darkness, alive, full, strange, its own thing, complete and particular, existing whether we imagine it or not, or rather, existing only in this imagining, only in the space between the question and the answer, only in the mind of someone lying in the dark, at the edge of sleep, wondering what might have been. The world tonight, if the rock had missed, the world tonight would be a world without human beings, a world without cities, without agriculture, without writing, without any of the cultural accumulation that we call civilization, a world inhabited by the descendants of the late Cretaceous dinosaurs, 66 million years evolved, filling every ecological niche that the Earth's changing geography and climate has opened, a world of extraordinary biological richness, richer, in many ways, than our world, because it would not have experienced the Anthropocene extinctions that have eliminated so much of the biological diversity of the last 10,000 years. The large animals of the alternate world would be larger than the large animals of ours. The diverse herbivores would range from the enormous sauropods to the smaller, more agile hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, to the insect-sized microdinosaurs of the forest floor. The predators would range from the massive descendants of the tyrannosaurids to the sleek, fast descendants of the dromaeosaurs, to the small, intelligent troodontids, hunting in social groups with a coordination that might be described as tactical. The ocean of the alternate world would be full of ammonoids and mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, and the diverse fish and invertebrate communities that 66 million years of uninterrupted evolution had produced. The reefs would be rich, the deep ocean populated, the polar seas inhabited by cold-adapted species that had evolved for the cooling high latitudes of the alternate Cenozoic. The sky would be full of pterosaurs and birds, the pterosaurs enormous in the soaring niches, the birds diverse and behaviorally complex in the smaller niches. The night sky would be clear and dark, because even if there were cities in the alternate world, their light would not yet have spread across the entire globe, or if it had, the light they emitted might be of wavelengths different from human cities, if the civilization that built them had different aesthetic and practical needs. And somewhere in the alternate world tonight, in a forest that might be where a human city stands in our world, or in a grassland that might be where a human agricultural region lies, or in a coastal settlement where the richness of the alternate ocean supports a dense population of intelligent, tool-using, social theropods. There might be creatures lying in the equivalent of their night's rest, looking at the equivalent of the dark, wondering at the equivalent of deep time and alternate histories and the fragility of existence, wondering what their world would have been like if a rock had hit 66 million years ago. Epilogue. The gift of the catastrophe. The rock hit. In our world, the rock hit, and the world it hit was destroyed, remade, emptied of its Cretaceous richness, and refilled, slowly and patiently, with something new. The dinosaurs died, all of them that were not birds, all of them that we spend our childhoods marveling at and our adulthoods mourning. The mosasaurs died, the ammonoids died, the pterosaurs died. The great Cretaceous world ended with a violence and a completeness that is difficult to contemplate, and from that ending, everything began. The mammals rose, the birds diversified into 1,000 forms. The forests of the Cenozoic grew, richer and more varied than the forests of the Cretaceous, shaped by the new herbivores and the new pollinators and the new seed dispersers that the mammalian radiation produced. The grasses spread, the grasslands formed, the savanna appeared, and on the savanna, a small lineage of primates came down from the trees and found, in the open landscape, the ecological pressures that drove the evolution of bipedalism and tool use, and eventually language and cumulative culture. And from that small, vulnerable, upright walking primate, everything that we call civilization arose, the art and the science and the mathematics and the music, the cities and the ships and the roads and the bridges, the books and the telescopes and the microscopes and the particle accelerators, the poems and the philosophies and the religions and the ethical systems, everything that makes us, in our own self-assessment, the most remarkable thing that the earth has ever produced. The impact was a catastrophe. It killed 75% of all species on Earth. It was among the worst events in the history of life, and it was also, from the perspective of the creatures writing and reading this sentence, the necessary precondition for our existence. Without the impact, no mammals. Without the mammals, no primates. Without the primates, no hominins. Without the hominins, no us. This is not a reason to celebrate catastrophe. The loss of the non-avian dinosaurs and all the other species of the end Cretaceous extinction was a genuine loss, a loss of biological richness, of evolutionary diversity, of 65 million years of accumulated ecological complexity. We cannot know what the alternate world of the surviving dinosaurs would have been like, but it would have been extraordinary, and its loss is not nothing, even if it is a loss we can only imagine. But it is a reason for a certain kind of gratitude, not gratitude for the catastrophe that seems perverse, but gratitude for the specific, contingent, improbable fact of existence. You are here tonight, lying in the dark, thinking about dinosaurs and asteroids and alternate worlds, because a rock hit the Earth 66 million years ago, not despite that catastrophe, because of it. You are the creature that catastrophe made possible. The rock hit, and here you are. The alternate world is beautiful, in the way that all imagined things are beautiful, completed, and whole in the imagination, without the messiness and uncertainty of actual existence. The great sauropods move through the alternate forest. The intelligent troodontids call to each other in the alternate night. The mosasaurs hunt in the alternate sea. All of it is vivid and specific and real in the mind's eye. But you are here, in this world, in the world that the rock made. And this world with its mammals and its birds and its flowering plants and its humans and its cities and its art and its science and its capacity to imagine alternate worlds and to mourn the dinosaurs that were lost. This world is also extraordinary, also rich, also full of things worth being grateful for. Let the alternate world rest in the dark, where it lives. Let the great sauropods sleep in the alternate forest. Let the intelligent theropods look at the alternate stars and wonder at the fragility of their existence. Let the alternate ocean roll under the alternate moon, and let the world you actually inhabit, this world, the world the rock made, be enough. Let it be more than enough. Let it be the extraordinary, improbable, beautiful thing that it is, shaped by 66 million years of mammalian evolution and 10,000 years of human civilization, and all the catastrophes and recoveries and lucky misses and direct hits that brought you to this moment, lying in the dark, at the edge of sleep, on a planet that is almost incomprehensibly fortunate to exist at all. The rock hit, and here you are. Sleep well. Good night.